Hello and welcome to this month's IPHE webinar series. The IPHE or the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, is an organization whose mission is to facilitate and accelerate the transition to clean and efficient energy and mobility systems using hydrogen fuel cell technologies in applications in sectors around the world. Today, we're joined for another webinar on the GREET environmental lifecycle analysis model for hydrogen fuel cell applications. And to introduce the speaker for today's webinar, I have Neha Rastagi joining me from DOE headquarters. Hi, Neha.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for organizing this. My name is Neha. I'm with the Fuel Cell Technologies Office. I manage our systems analysis portfolio. It's my pleasure to introduce Amgad Elgowainy from Argonne National Labs. Amgad leads lifecycle analysis for the DOE's Fuel Cell Technologies Office, and the GREET model that he'll be presenting is used widely around the world for lifecycle analysis of fuels. So Amgad, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Neha and Eric, and hello everyone. This is Amgad Elgowainy from Argonne National Lab. Today I will present to you the GREET environmental life cycle analysis tool with a focus on hydrogen and fuel cell applications and the pathways. GREET has been supported by several DOE offices, including the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office. And with that, I want just to start with who are the sponsors of the GREET model, mainly several offices under the U.S. Department of Energy, mainly the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And here I show in the historical order of the different offices. The Vehicle Technologies Office was the first sponsor of GREET in 1995. Followed by the Bioenergy Technologies Office in the early 2000s, and followed by the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office in the mid-2000s, and then followed by other offices, as you see here on the screen. GREET is a publicly available tool that is free to download. We update GREET annually and post to our website around October time frame, along with the documentation of all updates and expansions. Quickly, few major users of GREET. GREET is used by the California Air Resource Board, here shown as CARB, and California uses GREET to calculate the carbon intensity of different fuels under its low carbon fuel standards. The United States Environmental Protection Agency used the GREET as one of the tools in their suite of models for the renewable fuel standards and the vehicle greenhouse gas standard developments. Of course, our major customer is the U.S. Department of Energy. However, other government agencies such as the United States Department of Agriculture, the Navy, use GREET for their research and development decisions. The Department of Defense also uses GREET for their alternative fuel purchase requirements. Almost all energy companies and automakers use GREET for addressing their questions on sustainability and for screening alternative vehicle and the fuel system combinations. By far, our major users come from academia, so universities use GREET for education purposes and to conduct research in graduate schools. So GREET has now exceeded 40,000 registered users worldwide. At the bottom left, you see some key users of GREET. On the top right, you see the distribution of our users, mainly in North America, about 2/3, but a decent number of users in Europe and Asia. And at the bottom right, again, you see that academia makes more of half of our users, but the industry, the energy industry, the auto industry make a big portion. Government agencies, consulting companies, research institutions also are significant users of GREET. So GREET stands for greenhouse gases, regulated emissions, and energy use in technologies. Previously, it was in transportation, but now the model scope is beyond the transportation. At the bottom of the screen, left to right, you will see we track energy sources, primary energy sources in nature from their well or original point in nature, all the way through processing, conversion, transportation, distribution, fueling, all the way to the end use of energy. In this case, the application here is a vehicle. So this is what we call fuel cycle or well to wheels. And the well to wheels is separated into two stages, well to pump and then pump to wheels. On the top right, vertically, you will see we have also a tool focusing strictly on vehicle manufacturing cycle, and in there we also track material from their original source in nature. So we start with the raw material, the mining, the transportation, the processing of the material, the making the parts, stamping of parts, vehicle manufacturing, all the way through the end of use of vehicle components, which include either disposal or recycling. So GREET mainly is developed in the Excel platform. GREET 1 is what we call the fuel cycle, and the GREET 2 module or model covers the vehicle manufacturing cycle, and there are several add-on tools related to stochastic simulation tools. We have other biofuel-related modules that are attached to the Excel model. About 10 years ago, we developed the GREET in a more user-friendly interface. We call it GREET.net, and that interface is more user-friendly. It allows more plug and play, drop and drag processes, inputting and out, specifying inputs and outputs. It has regional evaluation capabilities, and it has direct link to the data sources in that model. In that platform, we separate the data from the software so that we can update the software and push it to the user without touching their database, or the user may elect also to update their database or keep a copy and update the data that we push to users on an annual basis. On the bottom left, I show we have also a YouTube channel for GREET use and features covering both the Excel platform and the .NET platform. GREET scope is national for the U.S. By the nature that we serve the U.S. Department of Energy, so we try to have a national perspective. So in that sense, when we look at a specific technology pathway, we try to capture that the inputs are not necessarily the same across a given technology deployment. For example, power generation units using the same technology and the same fuel may have different conversion efficiency, may have different emission profiles. Similarly, refineries across the U.S., some source heavy crude, some source light crudes. They have different complexity, different product slates, and therefore we have different energy requirements and the carbon footprint. Vehicles, even within the same class, the compact class or the mid-size class, may have different fuel economy depending on the make and the model. So with that, we capture the national distribution of these parameters, especially the significant ones that impact the well-to-wheels, and we build the distribution function based on the data we have statistically, and then we sample these data, propagate them through the model so that we can also show, the carbon intensity or the energy use or the water consumption in a statistical form, showing distribution of the forecast, and then we can present the results as some mean value with some variation around it. So stochastic capability of GREET is important when we look at variability or uncertainty of certain inputs and how they impact the outputs of interest. GREET scope in transportation covers the major transportation sectors. Road transport, originally GREET was focused on light-duty vehicles, but then was expanded to cover the medium and the heavy-duty vehicles, looking at various powertrains. Then we expanded GREET to cover the air transportation, looking at both passenger and freight transportation using alternative fuel blends. Hydrogen may play a role there indirectly, since aviation in general is more challenging to electrify directly, so it could be indirectly electrified through using a zero carbon electricity to produce hydrogen with a CO2 stream to synthesize a liquid hydrocarbon with the desired volumetric energy density for these applications. So this is synthetic fuel is a module that is forthcoming in the next GREET release. GREET also covers the rail transportation with support from the Federal Rail Administration of the Department of Transportation, and there we cover the freight and the passenger transportation with different fuels, and we are adding also a hydrogen pathway for the rail application, both freight and the passenger, which will be partly in the next release of GREET, and then the year after will be fully implemented. We also cover the marine transportation, which mainly focuses on air pollution at ports, but also they have greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. We look at ocean and inland water transportation. We look at the alternative marine fuels, and again, a synthetic fuel, a liquid hydrocarbon synthetic fuel from renewable hydrogen and the CO2 will be forthcoming in the next GREET release. So GREET doesn't simulate in silos, so we interact with several other DOE models. For example, for the fuel cycle or well-to-wheels, we need a fuel economy, so we leverage another DOE tool called Autonomy, which is a vehicle simulation tool that is able to build a vehicle bottom up to satisfy certain performance criteria using different powertrains, and this way we have a consistent base criteria that sizes the different vehicle components, and therefore the model simulates how these vehicles will operate on a driving cycle using the performance map for engines and other components to project fuel economy on the different driving cycles. Autonomy also gives us, since it sizes the vehicle components, it gives us the weight of each component, which we use other database to determine the material composition of these components, and then we can input these and run our vehicle manufacturing cycle. GREET is usually the output is on a per vehicle basis or per mile or kilometer driven or per megajoule of fuel produced. But if you want to understand what are the implications on a national level, looking at different fleet scenarios, whether it is for on-road, we have the vision model or the non-road, which is the neat model, we can really project on a per vehicle level to a fleet and the national scope and understand the potential reduction in energy use or carbon emissions or water use and so on. GREET interacts with specific hydrogen models like the H2A production model, the hydrogen delivery scenario analysis model, all supported by the Hydrogen and the Fuel Cell Technologies Office, basically receiving inputs related to energy efficiency and providing back life cycle energy use and emissions. And many other users really use GREET at the back end to tie the environmental footprint or impacts of different vehicle fuel combination along with the economic assessment. So the metrics covered by GREET include energy use, greenhouse gases, criteria pollutants, and also water consumption. Under the energy use category, we look at fossil sources versus non-fossil sources. Of course, the fossil sources, the carbon we bring from the ground and release into the air, so it has implication on the global warming. We dissect even the fossil energy by type, since some of the fossil sources are domestic, which kinds of cater into energy security, while other sources might be imported, such as petroleum, which plays also into the energy security and has some economic implication. We look at non-fossil and renewable energy sources, including biomass, nuclear energy, hydropower, wind power, solar power, geothermal, among others. Greenhouse gases is an important category. We cover the main greenhouse gas species, the CO2, the methane, and the N2O, combine them with their global warming potential to arrive at a CO2 equivalent. Air pollution is another key metric in GREET. We look at volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter less than 10 micron or 2.5 micron, sulfur oxides, among others. And for air pollution, we show well-to-wheels or total emissions, but also because air pollutants impact local population, especially in areas where we have high population density, such as urban areas. We also show a subset that quantifies the urban emissions. Water consumption has been added about 10 years ago in GREET as a new metric because almost every energy use requires some significant amount of water, and therefore a major energy deployment in a given region will draw significant water, significant amounts of the available water, and therefore may cause stress in certain regions. And this is why we added the water consumption factors for almost every process in the GREET model. GREET functional units for life cycle analysis include per service unit, like mile driven, per unit of output, for example, per kilogram of fuel or a megajoule of a fuel, or even like gasoline gallon equivalent if you want to compare different pathways on a consistent basis when compared to the conventional baseline gasoline vehicles for light-duty vehicles. We also look at per unit of input and the resources, and this will tell us how efficiently a pathway may use a given energy resource in nature. So there are hundreds of pathways in GREET. Here I give you a very high-level overview. The yellow boxes show the main energy feedstock, and then the light red or the pink boxes give you the ultimate fuel that can be produced from these feedstocks. I highlighted the hydrogen pathways in below. So coal gasification is a pathway for hydrogen reformation of methane, whether methane source is natural gas, fossil natural gas, whether conventional or shale gas. We look also methane sources that are renewables, such as landfill gas, biogas, synthetic methane. And then we have significant amount of byproduct hydrogen produced in the US from the chlorine or chloralkali plants and also ethylene cracker plants. So we have these pathways in GREET. Petcoke could be a source for hydrogen via gasification. Direct use of nuclear energy, such as thermochemical splitting of water, is a pathway. On the right here, we see biomass gasification could be a pathway to produce GREET, and cellulosic biomass. I mean, it could be of different types, as you see here. And of course, electricity, splitting water through electrolysis, whether the source of electricity is nuclear or other renewable, or any low carbon source of electricity is an attractive pathway for producing hydrogen, especially when you look at low carbon intensity green hydrogen for future industrial and vehicle applications. Will it also cover major powertrain technologies and the vehicle technologies, including the internal combustion engine or the spark ignition for gasoline and gasoline blend fuels, compression ignition that is more for diesel and diesel-like fuels. Here I highlight the fuel cell vehicles. We also cover the different onboard storage, for example, 350 bar, 700 bar, cryocompressed liquid. All of these have different implications when you package the molecule through liquefaction or compression, and depending on the pressure ratio, all of these has energy implication and therefore some emissions implications. GREET also cover plug-in vehicles, including battery-powered vehicles, plug-in hybrids. It also includes the hybrid electric vehicles using different fuels and pathways. So here, briefly, I want also to introduce the vehicle manufacturing cycle, which has the stages you see here. I briefly introduced that at the beginning. So vehicle manufacturing cycle starts with raw material recovery through mining or otherwise transportation of the raw material processing, and fabrication, then making the vehicle components, and then the manufacturing and the vehicle assembly all the way to at end of life. These components, vehicle components, could be either disposed or recycled. Here, this is a more detailed picture about how we develop material inventory for vehicles. Again, I mentioned we use autonomy to size the components, and we split vehicle components into major subcomponents, such as the body or gliders, the powertrain, transmission systems, the chassis, electric motors, or controllers, such as for electric vehicles. We have a major module for the battery in GREET, covering the different battery technologies, cathode materials, and including the energy used in battery manufacturing. And then we have other materials such as engine fluids or transmission fluids, tires, and things like that. And again, we use simulation models to size the components. We also tap into some automotive system cost models, such as the ASCM from Oak Ridge National Lab. We purchase data from dismantling report for hundreds of vehicles, trying to segregate the component weight distribution in a given vehicle class. So we use engineering calculation, and we source some data from the literature. So GREET has over 60 key vehicle materials and materials that even apply to non-vehicle applications. Of course, the key materials include steel, aluminum, copper, all types of plastics, carbon fibers, and so on. The key factors impacting the vehicle cycle, of course, is the amount of material used, how much of the material is virgin versus recycled, and this is depend. Each component is different as far as the recycled amount or the recycled content. Lightweighting materials is a key topic now for vehicle lightweighting to meet certain fuel economy standards. And lightweighting material, of course, include aluminum is the near term, but longer term it could be magnesium or carbon fiber, high strength steel, advanced high strength steel. All of these can contribute to vehicle lightweighting. However, they are in generally more intensive to make these materials, and therefore, while you improve the fuel cycle or the well-to-wheels of the vehicle, there might be some negative implication coming from added energy use and the carbon footprint in the vehicle manufacturing cycle. Another key factor there is the vehicle lifetime. Of course, we calculate a one-time charge when we produce the vehicle, including how much energy, how much total emission associated with producing the vehicle over its life cycle. But we have to spread that on a per mile basis to be able to have it in a consistent unit with the fuel cycle and combine these two in what we call cradle to grave energy and emissions footprint. So in general, as I mentioned before, we try to have a consistent platform so that when we put fuel pathways and the vehicle systems side by side, we can compare them on a consistent basis. We use widely accepted methods and life cycle analysis protocols. We try to address actually emerging issues of interest to our sponsors. I mentioned lightweighting, for example, new onboard technologies, for example, for hydrogen vehicles, vehicle automation and connected automated vehicles is something we are evaluating. New fuel pathways or conversion pathways or technologies. We can always add these to GREETO and inform our sponsors about the implication of supporting a new technology pathway for a given vehicle fuel system. We try to source our data from primary sources, so especially the key data, electricity is one example. Petroleum pathways, we source data from 70% of the refineries in the U.S., refinery by refinery at the sub-process level. We purchase data for the new shale gas well development, thousands of wells actually in different places in the U.S. Oil sand projects, almost all 30-some projects in Alberta, Canada. We got the unit level data and process them, power generation, of course, fuel economy. So it is important to be able to get into primary data and process it ourselves, screen it, aggregate it into distributions, and then use it in our model. All of these, we document our data so that the user understands where a data point is coming from. Sometimes behind a single point of data is 3 years of work. We document, of course, how we screen data, process it, the modeling approach, and also provide in the documents some life cycle analysis results and provide some insights. We maintain openness and transparency of LCA so you can track inputs all the way to outputs and understand how data are processed in GREET. Of course, GREET is publicly available for free to users, so users can download and they can track data and look at our documentation. I should mention that GREET is primarily attributional LCA model, although sometimes we resort to some consequential analysis, such as when these issues are important. For example, land use change for some of the biofuel pathways, consequential analysis about deploying the plug-in vehicles in given certain regions, which generation unit will be dispatched to serve a certain vehicle loads, for example. So sometimes we resort to consequential, but primarily GREET is attributional LCA tool. And here I want to start focusing on the hydrogen pathways quickly. I mean, we look at hydrogen gaseous pathways where you can compress into tube trailers, move the hydrogen in tube trailers, and then send it to a refueling station. And the refueling station may have different configuration depending on the onboard storage they serve. A futuristic look will look at some transmission pipelines and distribution pipelines. Then we have the liquid pathways where you liquefy immediately after production, and then you can load into a cryogenic tanker and then move it to refueling station, which can really use the liquid in its own form to dispense, or can gasify and increase the pressure via pump or compressors to serve a gaseous onboard storage. Quickly, examples of some of the processes we involve for hydrogen. I mentioned the steam methane reforming is a key pathway for hydrogen, reflecting today's technology. Over 90% of hydrogen produced today is through steam methane reforming of natural gas. And at typical efficiency, lower heating value base of 70%, converting natural gas to hydrogen, from well to plant gate, including the upstream recovery of natural gas, processing, getting the pipeline quality natural gas, transportation, distribution, even methane leakage through the pathway, all the way through the SMR process. So well to plant gate of the SMR, we are talking about roughly 11 kilograms of CO2 are emitted to produce a kilogram of hydrogen. As a point of comparison, the gasoline, which in the US is 10% ethanol by volume, blended with raw gasoline, we have a well to use about the same amount, 11 kilograms of CO2 per gallon of gasoline equivalent, which has roughly the same energy in a kilogram of hydrogen within 2%. However, actually, the benefit of the hydrogen, even from a fossil source like SMR of natural gas, is in light-duty vehicles, we have a very high fuel economy ratio compared to the gasoline vehicle that is above 2. California really put that value at 2.5, and therefore you take more than half back if your life cycle analysis is in a per unit mile driven basis. So the 11 will likely be half or less. So, and there we can really get the reduction when we compare the hydrogen vehicle to the baseline gasoline vehicle. Byproduct hydrogen, I mentioned that in many places in the US, I mean, hydrogen is produced as a byproduct from the chloroalkali process. As you see here, I put our paper at the bottom left there, reference to our paper. But here for life cycle analysis, when you handle a multiple product output, in this case, hydrogen is a co-product. In fact, it is a byproduct. You can see, depending on the method you use to allocate the energy and the emission burden between the different products, you may have a totally different life cycle GHG emission footprint. As you see on the bottom left chart, If hydrogen was originally invented, actually it is a waste stream. This means that it is a zero carbon, and the small footprint there is related just to compression from the byproduct hydrogen pressure to 20 bar to be consistent with the 20 bar we get from the SMR. If hydrogen was originally used and we substitute actually the hydrogen to free the hydrogen to go into different markets, and we substitute the energy of the hydrogen with some fossil source like natural gas, you will see that your reduction will be between 20 to 25%. If you do a mass allocation for all the three products here, the chlorines, NaOH, and the hydrogen, then you have significant reduction simply because hydrogen mass is just too small compared to the mass of the other products. If you do a market value, you will see you have a different footprint. So this really highlights the importance of which method we use for allocating burdens, and more importantly, how transparent this should be made when we present the results to different stakeholders. Similarly, here the ethylene cracker plant is a major source for hydrogen. So as you crack the heavy hydrocarbon, whether ethane or propane or butane or even naphtha, you release hydrogen significantly to produce your key petrochemical feedstock. In this case, it might be ethylene, for example. So hydrogen in that case also will be a low carbon, but again, you see on the figure on the right, depending on whether you use substitution to release the hydrogen, use some fossil source like natural gas, or use mass-based allocation, and depending on your feedstock, whether ethane, propane, or others, you will see you will have different carbon footprint, especially when you compare it to the SMR. And at the far end in the figure, we show the market value allocation. I also included here at the bottom left a reference to our paper quantifying the life cycle analysis of the cracker plant. Here I show quickly where we have liquefaction plants today in the United States. We have a capacity slightly over 260 metric tons per day of hydrogen is being liquefied. Liquefaction is a very energy intensive process, although has a lot of virtues. I mean, economically, because you can package the molecules in a more volumetric, energy dense form and move it. Therefore, you could move it at a lower cost compared to tube trailers. But the liquefaction can consume between 11 to 15 or 17 kilowatt hour per kilogram, depending on the size of the liquefaction plant and the technology employed. If I use 12 kilowatt hours per kilogram, the liquefaction greenhouse gas emission will depend on the carbon intensity of the electricity use. In many cases, in the top three plants you see on this figure, they source hydropower. So the footprint of liquefaction is essentially zero, while in other places where the grid is sourcing fossil fuels, whether coal and or natural gas, then your footprint of liquefaction could become significant. If I use the US average mix, actually you are somewhere in between. So, but I note here that most liquefaction plants are really chasing low-cost electricity, low-cost hydrogen source, and also low-carbon electricity. I should also mention that the demand on liquid hydrogen is growing, and 4 additional plants are announced to be deployed to serve the growing U.S. market in the next few years. Here I show quickly the life cycle analysis greenhouse gas emission. This is only well to wheels. On the far left, you see the gasoline internal combustion engine vehicle. Next to that, you see the SMR pathway using the US mix to liquefy hydrogen. And you see that the liquefaction portion is significant. This is the gray bar of that bar is the carbon emission attributed to liquefaction. If I use a US average mix, however, this is not representative, as I showed in the previous slide, and depending on where the liquefaction plants are, it could be much lower than the US mix. It could be also higher. The third bar here shows what if we use hydro, like 3 of these liquefaction plants in North America. use hydropower to liquefy, and therefore I can get 50% reduction on a per mile basis compared to the gasoline. If I use a gaseous pathway using tube trailers, the drop is only 40%. And then next I show two byproduct hydrogen sources, which have a much better footprint compared to the gaseous SMR. So I can exceed the 50% reduction compared to the gasoline baseline vehicle. Of course, if we use a zero or near zero carbon electricity from nuclear, wind, or solar using high temperature electrolysis for nuclear, for example, or low temperature electrolysis for wind and solar, then our carbon emission reduction could exceed 80% and approach even 90%. However, as I mentioned before, the fuel economy ratio is key when we look at a fossil source like SMR. So when we move to the medium and the heavy duty vehicle, and depending on the vehicle class and the vocation, you will see several groups here I show. So the far left bar is the diesel baseline medium or heavy duty vehicle. And then the red arrow shows the amount of reduction by sourcing hydrogen from SMR. And we see really that the drop using SMR shrinks as we move into vehicles that demand more energy, and the driving cycle doesn't lend itself to a higher fuel economy ratio with the diesel counterpart. So the only way to get deeper reduction in carbon is to source a green hydrogen, and here we saw the solar low temperature electrolysis for a gaseous hydrogen pathway, and there you can get significant reduction. Again, as we move the classes from left to right, we notice that the fuel economy ratio declines, and therefore the SMR hydrogen benefit compared to diesel just shrinks as your fuel economy ratio declines and approaches parity or approaches the value of 1. So here we highlight the importance of the fuel economy ratio. And for light duty vehicle, we get fuel economy ratio in excess of 2. For medium and heavy duty vehicle, I mean, if that fuel economy ratio declines, the benefits of hydrogen from greenhouse gas perspective using the SMR will also decline. I mentioned that we also cover criteria air pollutants, and here I show on the vertical axis NOx emission, well to wheels, and on the horizontal axis I show the PM emissions, and I show the baseline diesel as a reference. I show other alternative fuels, but in the red and the green areas I show the gaseous and liquid hydrogen respectively. And depending on the source, whether it is SMR or renewable like solar, you will see you will have different well-to-wheel NOx and the PM emission. Here you see that for liquid hydrogen, if I source hydrogen from the SMR and I use the US grid mix to look at the NOx and the PM emission, you will see that the liquid hydrogen on a well-to-wheel basis, I mean, the PM emissions may even exceed that of a diesel pathway. However, we should note that using hydrogen fuel cell vehicles have no tailpipe emission, which is really what is driven by zero emission vehicle mandate in California and other states in the United States. And therefore, really, criteria pollutant emissions are more important in urban sense rather than a well-to-wheel sense. And they still can be attractive due to their low urban emissions, especially in emission-controlled areas. Here I show a preliminary slide on our work on the e-fuels. I mentioned this might be important for applications that we cannot directly electrify, such as aviation, marine, and rail. And you see different pathways here for from the baseline fossil fuels, pressure prop, diesel from natural gas. Then we show gasoline, blend the stock from petroleum. We see diesel from petroleum. We see the E10 gasoline with a 10% blend of ethanol by volume. Then we show the corn ethanol, some of the pathways for producing biofuels in the US. Then we look at different system boundaries. If we integrate the CO2 from the ethanol plant to make an FT fuel and allocate between the Fischer-Tropsch fuel and the ethanol, what will be the footprint. Then we look at what we call a standalone FT plants on the far right, and there you will see the deep reduction in carbon emission to make an FT fuel or an e-fuel, as we mentioned it, from nuclear sources, from wind, solar sources, and there we can get a low carbon, but yet a high energy density hydrocarbon fuel that can serve applications we cannot directly electrify through battery or fuel cells. This is an example of the vehicle manufacturing cycle. I mean, this is CO2 emissions in tons to make a given vehicle and how the different components contribute. You will see that we emit between 8 to 12 tons to make a vehicle, with the major contribution of fuel cell vehicles is the onboard storage carbon fiber, while for the batteries, the battery manufacturing and the battery size, depending on the vehicle range, is the major component. I here quickly point to a cradle-to-grave study we did with the US Drive. The US Drive is a partnership between DOE and the US energy and auto industries, including utilities. And we see here on the far left is the gasoline and diesel pathways, and then alternative pathways, whether for fuel or vehicles. And I highlight here the hydrogen fuel cell pathway. First, we look what if we improve the vehicle efficiency, the fuel economy, how much that may buy us with lightweighting and improve the, for example, here fuel cell peak efficiency. We see that we can get a decent emission reduction, but not deep enough to satisfy the deep emission reduction goals. So the only way is really to look at fuel substitution. So we want to look at energy sources such as wind here or solar for electrolysis. Only there you can get deep reduction, and the only footprint there is from the vehicle manufacturing. SMR with CCS could be a pathway if the CCS technology, carbon capture and storage, is developed. A biomass gasification could be also a low carbon pathway for hydrogen. And I want to talk about others, but I put a link to our report, and there is also a paper that documented this analysis. This is an example of how we serve the U.S. Department of Energy across offices. I mean, you see the electrification in the middle there, you see the biofuels are also there, and then you see the hydrogen group at the bottom of the chart. And we look at futuristic scenarios, different fuel pathways, and we show a range around a mean value to inform the DOE where the different technologies can achieve the greenhouse gas emission reduction goals of the different offices. So with that, I just want to conclude. This is a link to our GREET website where you can download the models, the documentation, and also where you can have links to our GREET YouTube channel. And finally, I want to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, especially for the hydrogen and fuel cell pathways. I want to thank the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office, in particular Dr. Sunita Satyapal, the Office Director, and the Analysis Program Manager, Neha Rustagi. With that, I thank you very much, and I again show the link to the GREET model. I also show the link to our techno-economic model for hydrogen delivery and refueling, what we call HDSAM. So please visit our websites for models and documentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Amgad, for that presentation. That concludes today's IPHE webinar. Be sure to check out our other webinars on the IPHE website, and to join us on social media by following _IPHE on Twitter to join the conversation. And with that, I'll thank everyone and say goodbye.